Do you remember where it all began? Were you there? Were you watching? Did you see when the vast, roaring fire was merely a spark? Many of our most famous cultural institutions, tentpoles of their respective fields, started out small. The National Football League, the biggest professional sports circuit in the United States, began in 1920 as a league with 10 teams from 4 states. Similarly, the FIFA World Cup can trace its roots back to the 1884 British Home Championship, which featured the UK's 4 national teams. With regards to Smash Ultimate, the year 2019 saw 3 of the most prestigious Smash tournaments ever, each of which had their own humble origins. The Big S9, with almost 1,800 entrants, started in 2011 as a 115-entrant Melee National. Genesis, whose 2009 iteration was at the time the biggest ever Melee event, was still dwarfed 10 years later by its near 3,800 entrant total. And of course, EVO, the Super Bowl of fighting games, which in 2019 saw more than 9,000 entrants, began in 1996 as the 40-entrant Battle by the Bay. For the past dozen or so years, these 3 events, plus Supernova mixed in somewhere, have been the cornerstones of competitive Smash, the undisputed most important tournaments of any year in which they've been held. It's not a coincidence that these events all have histories at least a decade long. It takes time to build grassroots connections, develop legacies, accrue prestige, and it's also no surprise that all these events originate from the United States, which for years has been the epicenter of the global Smash Bros. Competitive scene. But within the last 5 years, that dominance has begun to wane, and one of the key factors driving this shift has been the emergence of a new tournament series, a franchise of events which has sparked a revolution in the Smash community. This challenger, this interloper, will soon threaten to topple the established pillars of Smash Ultimate and establish itself as the most important series in the history of the game. But like those legacy events it now stands to overrun, this event too began as a mere spark. 5 years ago, across the Pacific Ocean from the world's biggest Smash scene, a collection of Japanese tournament organizers decided to form a team. They did not know, couldn't have known, how far their creation would grow, the massive event it would become. But I think they might have imagined it, might have dreamed or fantasized at how the community would come together around their little spark and fan its flames ever higher. After all, they called it Bonfire. Real quick, look at the video length. This project has honestly taken a lot out of me, so if you at any point enjoyed this video, could you please consider supporting me by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It's really appreciated. Thank you for your consideration. Now, let's get into this. With the country emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic and modest-scale tournaments resuming activity in different regions across the country, late 2020 seemed like a time of reconstruction for the Japanese Smash community. By December, the country had already seen tournaments of more than 100 entrants in cities like Osaka and Aichi. The Tokyo area, however, was yet to return to events of that scale, at least until December 13th, when a group of TOs assembled for the first time to hold the inaugural instance of their newest tournament series. Its name was Kagaribi, and it has gone on to become the biggest and most important series of events for Smash Ultimate worldwide, regularly breaching 4-figure attendance numbers and making or breaking dozens of players' competitive seasons. In comparison, this first 133-person tournament was a much more modest affair, but that didn't mean it wasn't significant. The event's first seed was Zachary, a young competitor who had just turned 18 that year, and who had, throughout Ultimate's then recent history, been a fierce contender for the best player in Japan and top 10 in the entire world. Zachary was known for piloting tons of different characters, sometimes within the span of a single event, but all with an efficiency and mastery that was beautiful in its lethality. Here he stuck mainly to Rob, his main throughout the latter half of 2019, while also mixing in some Joker, a budding co-main, and Wario, a long-held pocket pick. And though he faced some adversity in the form of Roy Crom player Takumi, he made it through to winners finals largely uncontested. But though Zachary would go on to have a long and storied relationship with the Kagaribi series, today he had the misfortune of facing a player in the middle of a statistical anomaly. Ken entered Kagaribi as the second seed, and it was well earned. Considered by some the greatest Sonic player in Smash, Ken has played offline since 2015 and gradually, ironically much slower than he deserved, he's become a household name in the scene. Ken was the only player to win a major with Sonic in Smash 4, the highest-ranked Japanese player on Panda Global's Wii U lifetime ranking, and the best Sonic in Ultimate for at least the first half of the game's lifespan. But despite being one of the most accomplished players in the game's history, when Ken entered the bracket at Kagaribi, he decided to put one more notch in the belt, and perform a feat that, to my knowledge, he'd never done before. Not only would Ken win the tournament, he'd do so without dropping a game.
あまりにも盤石。手堅すぎるこの男、どうやったら崩れる。でそのままキスでしたね。よこせまして、お見事。外変更入っていますが、空中前追い切って架け放しにピタリ一撃。後ろ投げで激痛ですか。ファイヤーバードでタイミングをずらして空中まで戻ってくるが、横強攻撃引き完成がベックル変更になって、
しかしその場で
空前から
そうだろうわ抜ける
上側に抜きました。
すぎる
そのままから横強表裏かけて完璧です。その起き上がりに横スマッシュ一発。強気の前出し投げ。
一応シールドが控えてるんでね。
うまい。そのまま撃墜。最後の最後は手堅い空前復帰阻止として。
Now, I have a whole separate video on why this is such a big deal, but TLDR, no-hitters in Smash are rare, especially at events with more than 100 entrants, multiple of whom would go on to be globally ranked. But despite the long odds, Ken pulled it off, 3-0ing Zachary's Joker in Winners Finals and sweeping the ensuing set of grands against Kome, who'd taken the run back on Ultimate's wildcard in Losers. In the process, Ken cemented himself as the first in what would come to be an enduring legacy of players. He became the very first Kagaribi champion. Of course, Ken wasn't the only player who performed well at this event. A round of applause is deserved at least by the players who top-8'd the event. In a double elimination bracket, top 8 is a clean breaking point that's commonly considered the most important cutoff after winning the event or making the podium. So congratulations to Kome, Zachary, Shikai, Kameme, Masa, Gact, and Jagaimo, all of whom made their first ever Kagaribi top 8 here. Of these, the standout at the time was Masa, a Falco main who blew away his 34th seed, upsetting Kameme and Jagaimo en route to his 5th place finish. As if intentionally trying to mess with viewers even further, Masa would only go to a few ranked events over the next 2 years, frustrating eagle-eyed stats people as the Falco who never comboed and never attended, a textbook hidden boss. Come 2023 though, his participation would pick up, and he'd cement himself as a perennial top 50 threat and one of the best players in Japan. But of course, I think an almost larger congratulation goes out to the organizational team behind the event. Putting on a 100-plus person event itself is no small feat, and they pulled it off in a major metropolitan area on the heels of an unprecedented global pandemic. Their nearly 8-hour stream proceeded largely without issue. They broadcasted the entire top 8 in an era where Japanese events regularly let losers matches play out in the dark, and 2 weeks later, they even released a snazzy recap video. But dig a little deeper into the Kagaribi team, and none of this should be that surprising. The Kagaribi TOs, broadly, are a team-up between organizations VG Bootcamp and East Geek Smash, both of whom are basically the single largest tournament organization and streaming groups in their respective countries. So of course, Kagaribi was set up well with broadcasts from both groups. If you're pretty familiar with the alt scene, you'll recognize some of these names, like Watch, one of the most prolific Japanese TOs and a go-to translator for English events, or OM Naoto, one of Japan's highest profile commentators and a major player across the scene. But the Kagaribi TO team includes many, many more significant figures from across the community, to the extent that it might be one of the most experienced groups ever assembled. Here, tell you what, let's just go through all the people on Kagaribi 1's admin page and see what events they've organized before this one. Just name every series they've been involved in. Should be simple. Ueno Smash Ultimate Weekly, Kurora, Shona Smash Tournament Shintechi, Battle Gateway, Street Smash, Reimei, Smash Bros. 64/DX Joint Tournament 2020, Weekly Smash Party, Liquid Crystal Melee, Pokken Kanto Tournament, Smash Awesome 2018, Aurasphere Tokyo, Sumabato X Cyclops, KVO X TSB, Switch Party, Megaton Smash, Seibugeki, EGS Cup, Umebura, and EVO Japan 2020. Their collective portfolio encompasses dozens of majors, hundreds of locals, and thousands of hours of cumulative experience. Practically every notable event in the Tokyo area throughout 2019 had at least 2 of these people at the helm, which also means that everyone on the team had experience working with at least one other member. To those who are watching, it should have come as no surprise that this event went over as well as it did. Damn, what a tournament. What a return to form for Japanese Smash. They should do one of these again. Kagaribi number 2 was cancelled. Starting on January 7th, the Japanese government declared a state of emergency in the Tokyo area, the second since the start of the pandemic. Unfortunately for the Kagaribi TOs, they'd already scheduled the second main iteration for January 24th, with a smaller warm-up event, Kagaribi 1.5, set to take place on the 10th. The same day that the lockdown was announced, the Kagaribi Twitter account broke the news of the cancellation. Ultimately, the lockdown was lifted in March, and soon after it was revealed that the next Kagaribi would be held that same month, Come the 27th, players in Tokyo would be treated to Kagaribi 3. And that brings up an interesting tangent. Why not 2? In the West, common practice with numbered events is to maintain an index. For example, the 2020 Smash World Tour trailer announced Battle of BC 4, Smash Factor 9, and Port Priority 6, all of which were obviously not held in 2020. But when offline events did return in 2021 and 2022, these tournaments were still held with their numerals unchanged, BOBC 4, SF9, and Port 6. In Japan, though, TOs tend to view cancelled events as their own legitimate entries in the series. If you've ever tried to search up Umebura SP8 or Seibugeki 5, 6, or 7 and come up empty-handed, the reason is that those tournaments were planned to be held during the pandemic, and despite their cancellation, they're still memorialized in the naming scheme of their successors. Even to this day, the tradition carries on, with Chubu Regional Series Karasuma holding event number 21.5 last September, after the 21st iteration was cancelled due to Typhoon Shanshan. And, I don't know, maybe this is just sentimentalism from a cultural outsider, but despite the potential confusion, I think there's something beautiful in recognizing these events which, for one reason or another, only ever existed in the community's collective imagination. Kagaribi 3 wound up sneaking into a 2-month gap between Tokyo states of emergency. Fittingly, it was an event that could only happen with all the stars perfectly aligned. Though sporting a similar number of entrants to the first event, Kagaribi 3 was host to a considerably larger number of high-level players, including notable talents from the neighboring Kansai region like T and Atelier. Because of that, while the first Kagaribi is largely considered to be a national at best, Kagaribi 3 is widely labeled a major, marking it as one of the game's most significant tournaments. Once again, Zachary entered the tournament as the number 1 seed, and despite some scares in best-of-3 pools, was able to make it to winter semis. Here, his combination of Wari and Rob came up short in the face of Atelier's Pokemon trainer, but in Luce's quarters, Zachary seemed to rally, swiftly dispatching Sue. However, it would soon be clear that his time was still yet to come, as Zachary again found himself on the wrong end of a player making the run of a lifetime. If you were playing close attention, you might have known about hero main Akakiksu. Throughout 2020, he'd had a couple standout performances at the Sumabata Regionals, taking wins on Shiryuki, Kome, T, Atelier, and Jogabu across his first ever offline events. Clearly, this was an up-and-comer on a skyward trajectory, but at the time, Japanese events simply weren't as visible in mainstream Western circles. So for the majority of English-speaking Smash players, it was probably a system shock when they learned that a hero player had made it to 3rd place at a major.
フルブキック奥側回避読み前の終了この読みで崩した面白い選択肢が空中後ろで撃墜だいぶダウンにA波によるダメージソースが確保できない状況でマジンギリの一撃が炸裂
At Kagaribi 3, Akakiksu entered as the 28th seed and quickly outperformed expectations by upsetting 5th seed Raito in pools. He followed that up with a win over Mega Man player Repo, before falling in winner's quarters to Atelier. Undaunted, the hero remained steadfast in his quest, and proceeded to win his next 4 straight sets, besting Leia, Shikai, Takumi, and in a Game 5 nail-biter, sending the tournament's Seed 1 Zachary tumbling out of the event. Akak's run would at last conclude in losers finals in a Game 5 set with T, but his accomplishments made him the breakout star of the event. Crucially, the general perception of Hero at the time was that he was largely a gimmick character, whose gameplay was locked to zoning with his neutral or side special, or hoping for RNG swings with his critical hit smashes, or by pulling sudden, strong moves out of his menu down special. But Akakiksu focused on playing the character like a sortie, spacing out opponents with Hero's range, using up B out of shield as a defensive tool, and aiming to pull buff spells out of the menu that just made his game plan more effective. It was not only a novel playstyle, but vitally a consistent one, on a character till then labeled fundamentally inconsistent. And it ultimately drove a new wave of results, not just for Akak, who'd ride out a bumpy road to top playerhood, but also for the Dragon Quest heroes themselves. Ultimately, Kagaribi's victor would be T, coming back after his defeat in Winners Finals to win the 9-game grands over Atelier, establishing himself as the 2nd ever Kagaribi champion. T again made a name for himself in 2019 and has carried on as one of Japan's strongest players into the current era. Curiously, this remains T's only major victory on home soil. His other 5 major wins came or would come in North America, where he won Thunder Smash 3 and Crown 2, or surprisingly, in Europe, where he won Temple Hermes, Lodyssey, and UFA 2022. So where the first Kagaribi is significant mainly for it having been put on, period, Kagaribi 3 remains a landmark event for many of its competitors. Congratulations to all the Kagaribi first-time top 8ers, T, Atelier, Akakiksu, Takumi, Sue, and Hudo. Let's just say it. Kagaribi 3 had a weird top 8, right? 6 players seeded 12th or lower, 2 of whom were in the 20s, when outside of Masa, the lowest seed in Kagaribi 1's top 8 had been Jagaimo at 10. There's no way to currently quantify a top 8's weirdness among Smash stats, so if you'll indulge me a bit, I'd like to invent one. In 2020, Jackie Peanuts, then of PG Stats, introduced SPR, or Seed Performance Rating, basically a number to measure how much a player over or underperforms their seed at a particular event, found by counting the number of loses rounds from where they were expected to place to where they actually placed. Now in 2025, I'd like to welcome you to SR, or Surprise Rating. The top 8's Surprise Rating is the sum of the absolute values of the SPRs of its 8 constituent players. In other words, it's just a total measurement of how many rounds off each of its participants were from their expected placements. Using this methodology, Kagaribi 1 gives us a modest surprise rating of 19, while Kagaribi 3, with 6 seeds higher than 8, gives us a much sturdier rating of 31. I feel like that generally captures the degree to which Kagaribi 3 eclipses 1 in the weirdness of its top 8. But there is a flaw to this metric. It relies on having good seeding in the first place. I think it's time for us to get into the world of Japanese seeding. Whenever seeding gets brought up in the context of Smash tournaments, it's usually so that some party can lodge a complaint about how one tourney or another is seeded, but as someone who's personally covered seeding at a couple hundred events in the past few years, I think I can state with some authority that most people don't get how seeding is meant to work. The overarching goal of seeding is to increase the efficacy of a bracket by separating out the most skilled participants so that they don't meet too early. If player A and B are the 2 best competitors at an event, but they play round 1, then whoever loses will have a disproportionately difficult losers bracket ahead of them. Meanwhile, players on the other side of bracket will have a relatively easier time making deeper runs. Seeding is meant to prevent scenarios like this, while also working to ensure that players don't run into too many repeated matchups, and thus lessen the data quality over a season, or avoid conflicts that may arise from, say, multiple players of the same region playing each other at overseas events. Japanese and Western tournaments have long held different standards while seeding. In part because of a long-standing practice of using a seeding algorithm, seeding at major Japanese events often looks, from a Western perspective, sort of wrong, or at least pretty strange. A brief write-up from LumiRank member Stuart98 summarizes a lot of these discrepancies. Japanese seeding is often too focused on numerical rankings or the quality of wins and losses, is too biased towards recent results, often undervalues players who are returning from long breaks, and rarely takes into consideration repeat matchups. Here, let's get a concrete example. Kagaribi 4 is the first in the series to take place over 2 days, June 26th and 27th, with a 386-player bracket, more than double the previous entry. And for some reason, this event's 25th seed is Proto Bantam. Throughout 2019, Bantam was one of the Japanese players to watch, getting 4th at Umebura SP3, 2nd at Umebura Japan Major 2019, and 5th at the year's biggest tournament, EVO. But here, perhaps because of how he'd been absent from major tournaments since early 2020, perhaps because of his outlier 257th place finish at 2019's Umebura SP7, Proto Bantam was seeded under players like Natsu, Yuzu, and Tet. Proto Bantam went on to win the tournament.
通して出し直した相手に空中に取られる裏側対応から上必殺技フィニッシュ何を仕掛けるか空気阻止パワーへさせつだ2発目は出せず空中に取られる左もう一度伸ばしていったのがモシゲル選手いやーガーブドルフィンスラッシュ高いぞ先に行くかおおパステメガブルと92点の判定も硬いモンタリングからガックのフェックス壁ですね。目が割れた。まだ耐えてはいるものだ。まずい。メガボルトで激戦。最後の最後は。
In an overwhelming performance, Proto Bantam would upset Shuton, Zachary T, and more en route to his debut major championship, the first of many he'd claimed throughout this period. Bantam would, for a time, be the uncontested best player in the country, and later, ironically, he'd develop a reputation for struggling in the country but dominating events overseas, before unfortunately having to step away from competition due to health reasons around 2023. There were a few factors behind this initial success. His overall skill and tenacity, his careful juggling of 2 finely honed co-mains, but perhaps most helpful was the fact that Min Min was fucking broken. For more on this, we go to resident Min Min expert RisterMice.
When Proto Banham finally returned to offline Smash at Kagaribi 4, he brought with him a demon, the first DLC character to be released after the onset of the pandemic. His opponents had never fought a Min of his caliber before, and the version of the character they found themselves facing was very different from her modern incarnation. Patch 11.0.1 Min had an up smash that was 1 frame faster and sent up to 5 units farther than it does today. Her neutral layer had 2 less frames of end lag, making it safe as both a combo and a kill option. And most crucially, at the time, her forward tilt and forward smash did way more shield damage. On patch 13.0.1 or later, when any Min throws out their arms at you, you can shield the hits and then counterattack. But back then, if you shielded multiple of her moves, you'd just die for it. And though Proto Banham played immaculately throughout the tournament and won sets with solo Lucina, it was also thanks to the titanic strength of his new pre-patch main that ensured his victory, and began his reign of supremacy over Japanese Smash.
Still, congratulations go out to first-time Kagaribi top 8ers Proto Banham, Hero, Yoshidora, and Leia. Aside from Banham, the standout performance goes to Yoshidora, a Wi-Fi warrior since the days of Brawl, who, at his first ever unambiguous major event, well outplaced his 36th seed to place 5th, overcoming the likes of Choco, Atelier, AIM, and Leia in the process. Though it would be another year and change before receiving widespread global attention, Yoshidora would go on to join a new wave of Japanese players post-quarantine, even breaching the global top 10 in 2023. These days, it's not common to find a Smash fan who's never heard of Yoshidora. But of course, there's one more player we need to talk about here, and that's Zachary. For 3 Kagaribis in a row, Zachary had been seeded first, and in a series of unfortunate events, he'd found himself on the wrong end of a statistical anomaly each time. First Ken's no-hitter, then Akakiksu's breakout showing, and finally Proto Banham's SPR9 campaign to victory. None of these tournaments had been bad for him. He'd taken good losses each time, never missed the top 4, and at this event he'd even made a loser's run, besting Atelier, Leia, Kome, Hero, T, and even winning the first set of grand finals over Banham before falling Game 4 in the second. These were results to be proud of, no doubt, but they weren't victories, and things could only keep going this way so many times more. In October of 2021, Kagari 5 was set to be the biggest in the series yet. Again, almost doubling the previous iteration's entrant count, this tournament was to be held in a new, bigger venue, with nearly all of Japan's best players in attendance. And for the first time ever, this would be a Kagaribi without Zachary as its first seed, with that honor instead going, of course, to Proto Banham. Clearly, something was missing here. Some anomaly, some outside occurrence, some freak of statistics that would finally work for Zachary rather than against him. But what could it be? Maybe a quirk of fate? Maybe something he'd never tried? Or maybe something that nobody had seen coming.
There we go!
That war of attrition, right? Like you can take an infinite amount of percent. Oh my goodness.
Yep.
Oh, cheap. Wow. I mean, what are you gonna do in that situation, right?
追加実証これは空中に取られるから空中を狙ってというところで、ポケモンスタジアム2という これは撃があるんですけど、はじめ空中にいることで迎撃態勢を取っていると。強気の前回避だったが、空中しろ撃墜。
According to my knowledge, Zachary went all Sora this tournament. I don't think he switched off once.
This pass.
Wow.
Wow, the down smash.
着地から空中しろ、一気に決めきった。打ってきた横スマッシュ。
待ちましたね。
じっくり待って、写真もう来る。チェンジ挟んでジャストシュートした強烈スマッシュ。強気、空へから空へ、大きなダウンショットっていきますが、強気の空中しろ上がれ。最後の最後はこの右足でこの位置関係をなんということだ。やはりなんていう下強から上スマッシュ。文句なしの一撃が決まってユナースファイナルリバース3-0まくって勝ったのはゲームイッサクレイ。
How was this slow character reverse 3-stocking power mythic like that?
I want to be able to just do something. I want to be DLC.
Don't get a lot for doing this shit. They do it because they love competition.
That was so good. Zachary played incredibly this whole night.
確かにこれはカウンター水増しが見えたがなんだかにここからスライスで今日は見るものの下から空中ニュートラル着地。これがスタッチ回りがうまく詰まってますよね。ですが変更が良すぎてしかも最大が9名着地9倍っていう高すぎる。次に押し出し込みに上スマッシュ。
Sora won a big tournament.
Wow, that's crazy.
God, I can't believe this. I can't fucking believe. No fucking way we lost.
お互い強気な選択肢が目立つ中、シュートもここぞと振った。
So, yeah, that happened. Congratulations to first-time Kagaribi top 8ers, Shuton and Etsuji. Awesome job, guys. Overall, this tournament went mostly according to seeding, with a total surprise rating of only 23, but... Okay, Zachary won the event with Sora. Sora, a character who'd only been in the game for less than 2 weeks, Zachary won a major with Sora. His first Kagaribi, the biggest Kagaribi ever, and Zachary won it. Sora... I can't process this. I'm not sure there is any processing this. Sometimes an event of unbelievable improbability just happens right in front of you, and you have to go the rest of your life just accepting it as reality. It's an unshakable reminder that we live in a world of unlikelihoods, that every aspect of our existence is the result of millions on millions of minuscule odd chances, all compounded on top of each other, as easy as it is sometimes to overlook it. The year was now 2022, and Japan was ready to ring in the new year with Kagaribi 6, now a 3-day event held from January 7th to the 9th. With about 750 entrants, it was once again poised to be an enormous tournament, but unfortunately, the Kagaribi series again ran afoul of COVID luck, with another surge in cases occurring around the same time. Although the event was still able to be held safely, many participants opted to drop out, including high seeds like Raito, Etsuji, Level 1, and Takumi. By this point, though, the Kagaribi team had plenty of experience dealing with COVID prevention. Logistically, the tournament continued as planned. But as for that bracket... With a surprise rating of 39, Kagaribi 6 was the most explosive tournament the series had seen yet. Congratulations are in order to first-time Kagaribi top 8ers, Passeriman, Repo, Riziasu, and Sylph. For Passeriman and Kameme especially, this event was a comeback tour. Both had put up pretty middling results for their standards in 2021, and both proceeded to blow their low seeds away in their first major of the new year, with Passeriman making it all the way to 3rd at SPR 9, and Kameme notching an SPR 8 run to 5th, utilizing a new Sora to help get him there. And this was rather unlike another notable player who, after winning the last Kagaribi without dropping a set using the game's final character, had decided to drop Sora entirely. Instead, 4th seed Zachary was of the opinion that the actual secret best character in the game was Sheik, and alongside his trusty Joker, he was setting out in this bracket to prove it. Initial showings were rocky. Zachary wound up going down 1-2 in his pool against Ridley main Nagare, ultimately needing to switch to Rob to close out the set. Though he'd defeat the next 2 opponents, his Joker would wind up falling to Passeriman in winner's quarters. To make top 8, he faced Protobanum, the player who'd bested him 2 Kagaribis prior. The Sheik came out, and suddenly, everything made sense.
うわ90種放てうわうますぎる回避をしかしうわー押し切り手のリターンどこまで伸ばせるか空中前8力うわースマッシュ
Zachary would 3-0 Protobanum and ride the momentum through the whole of top 8, reverse 3-0ing Sylph, and then tearing through Repo, Gact, and Passeriman without dropping a game. In Grand Finals, he'd face Shutone, the same opponent as last Kagaribi, but this time with the positions reversed. Shutone with the advantage of the winner's side, Zachary drained from his loser's run. Still, Zachary's Joker held strong, winning games, then the first set. Finally, after 8 games and 35 grueling minutes, Zachary came away the champion of Kagaribi 6, the first ever 2-time victor in the history of the series. I'd like to talk longer about Zachary's Kagaribi 6, the implications of winning back-to-back events, how it set him up to have a dominant showing as international competition resumed in 2022. Unfortunately, for reasons that you'll understand shortly, I instead need to talk about the Japanese Criminal Code. Chapter 23, Article 185. A person who gambles shall be punished by a fine of not more than 500,000 yen, or a petty fine. Article 186-2. A person who, for the purpose of profit, runs a place of gambling or organizes a group of habitual gamblers shall be punished by imprisonment with work for not less than 3 months, but no more than 5 years. Article 187-1. A person who sells a lottery ticket shall be punished by imprisonment with work for no more than 2 years, or a fine of not more than 1,500,000 yen. Initially, it doesn't seem like this would have much to do with a particular series of Smash tournaments. All these laws seem to indicate is that Japan has a testy relationship with cash prizes for games of chance, and that it does. Most forms of gambling are outright banned in the country, with the main exceptions being horse race bets, public lotteries, pachinko machines, and specifically licensed casinos. But those are all practices that have been specifically carved out in the country's legal text. Consider, instead, an independently run event. For a popular video game, which collects an entrant fee from all its participants in order to cover venue costs, and puts part of those proceeds towards a prize pool for the tournament's victors. Under Japanese law, that is considered an act of illegal gambling, mainly due to associations with historic illegal mahjong tournaments and video poker machines. Without developer support, which can skirt legal guidelines in a number of ways, including by issuing sports licenses to certain players, the only recourse for Japanese grassroots tournaments to collect necessary entrance fees while maintaining legality has been to eschew prize pools entirely. So, that's what they did. Every Kagaribi up to number 6, and every Kagaribi that will come after, has been played for a grand prize of 0 yen. Roughly $0. There's not money in Smash. For decades, across continents, this has been an absolute, something every serious competitor must grapple with at some point across their career. And for Zachary, back-to-back Kagaribi champion, that time comes now. Zachary is an outstanding talent, and not just in Smash. Since its release last year, he's been playing a new game, Pokemon Unite, a game with dev-supported national championships and $50,000 prize pools, and he's really good. His team, Gingadan, is really good. On February 26th, Gingadan wins the February finals, qualifying for the March event and setting them on a path that could lead to the World Championship tournament, with a prize pool of $500,000. And Zachary, now with another career laid out in front of him, is faced with a decision. It's not an easy one, but eventually, he makes it. And on March 24th, an announcement is posted. Zachary will be stepping away from competitive Smash to focus on Pokemon Unite for the time. He will not defend his title at Kagaribi 7. He will not attend a Kagaribi for the rest of the year. The tournament series that started with him at the helm, which had challenged him until he'd found new ways to master it, will now continue without him. An unbelievable improbability just months ago, now just one more reality to accept. That's kind of a downer. Let's talk about something else. This is Sylph, and just to be clear, he's very good at Smash Bros. He plays Sheik, and in fact has played Sheik since the days of Brawl in 2010, when he went by the tag Cross, and he's accomplished some incredible things. 9th at Sumabato X8, outplacing the likes of Earth and Masashi, a second suite of impressive results in Smash 4, wins on the likes of Repo, Sumasudo, and Takumi in Ultimate. But there's something about Sylph that doesn't fit in with the other Kagaribi major top 8ers. Let me show you. This is a chart of the global rankings of every player to ever make a top 8 at Kagaribi. I'm not even going to pretend this is legible data, it's not, but there are a few players here who stand out. One of them is down at the bottom, an interloper who emerges from nowhere to take the global rankings by storm. We'll be meeting him soon. But the other is up here, all the way at the top. In this period, from Orion Rank 2022 to Lumi Rank 2023, every player to ever top 8 at Kagaribi is, at some point, ranked in the global top 150. Everyone, that is, except that white line at the top. You can't see it because of everyone else covering it up, but that white line extends all the way straight across. It's the only one. Sylph is the only player to make a Kagaribi top 8 and never be globally ranked. What does that say about him, or about anything? Well, certainly nothing about his skill, which is leagues beyond what me, 99.9% of the people who play Smash, and even the vast majority of tournament-level players could ever hope to accomplish. Sylph's lasting career, highlighted by his Kagaribi 6 run, where he beat Dio, Rikururu, and Jogabu to get 7th place, is a testament to the fact that Sylph is objectively good at Smash, even if he never quite made it to a global ranking. I have a different question to pose. Can you remember your best moment? Do you know exactly how and when you were operating at your maximum capacity? Can you name down to the hour and day when you hit the pinnacle of your career? Sylph can. From January 7th to 9th, 2022, Sylph played the best Smash Ultimate of his life, and no one can deny that. Okay, one more tangent, and then I swear we're moving on. I promise, this one is important. In 1948, Japan enacted the Public Holiday Law and declared 9 official national holidays. Of these, 3 of them happened to fall within the span of a week: the Emperor's birthday on April 29th, the Constitutional Memorial Day on May 3rd, and Children's Day on May 5th. In 1951, 3 years after these holidays had gone into effect, a film executive in the country caught on to the bump in revenue from vacationers during this time and nicknamed the yearly period Golden Week. Now, with an additional 4th holiday in the mix on May 4th, Golden Week is essentially an annual week of festivities in Japan, a time when the entire country can get off work or school and focus on enrichment and gatherings. Like, for example, a Smash tournament. Throughout the late 2010s, the marquee Golden Week tournament was Immovable Japan Major, with both the 2017 and 2019 iterations occurring during the holidays. But in 2022, Immovable was still not ready to come back from its post-quarantine hiatus, leaving the door open for another event to fill its shoes. And so, we come to Kagaribi 7, the tournament that changed Ultimate. Congratulations to new Kagaribi top 8ers, Dio, Ashimo, and Akola. Kagaribi 7's top 8 weighs in with a surprise rating of 40, just barely edging out Kagaribi 6 before it. Of course, much of that comes at the hands of the event's victor, first-time Kagaribi and Super Major champion Akola. Akola is, if not the embodiment of Smash Ultimate itself, at least one side of its proverbial coin. Emerging from the ether of Japanese Wi-Fi, the future greatest Steve player in the world, the second player to ever be #1 of the game, Akola would work up to these accolades. For now, he would have to settle for being the lowest seeded player to ever win a major, coming into Kagaribi 7 as the 57th seed and annihilating Yoshidora, Omuatsu, Leia, Gact, and Ashimo to claim the gold medal. Once again, Kagaribi was host to an anomaly, perhaps the greatest that Smash Ultimate would ever see. In 1 year, Akola would go from a complete unknown to one of the greatest players in the game's history, a legacy which continues to endure into the present. But I don't want Akola's meteoric entrance to competitive Smash to leave Ashimo overshadowed. Hailing from the isolated Shikoku region, Ashimo had actually been attending these events for months already, placing 65th at Kagaribi 5 and 13th at Kagaribi 6, both times outplacing projections. He came into Kagaribi 7 as the 31st seed, and proceeded to topple Proto Banham, Masa, T, Gact, Hudo, and Subo en route to an unprecedented second place finish, in a grand finals between the 57th and 31st seeds. Like Akakiksu before him, Ashimo's run redefined both his perception as a player and the global perception of his character. Ryu, long viewed as inferior to his Echo Fighter Ken, has since become a consensus A-tier threat, with Ashimo, eventually a top 10 level player, consistently at the helm. Akola's introduction sent shockwaves through the competitive landscape of Smash Ultimate, and his rise to dominance would go on to lead years of storylines and community discourse. But looking back on it, Ashimo's breakout run is at least of proportional significance. So now, with 6 iterations of Kagaribi in the book, we've seen a no-hitter, a character reshaping run, a public call-out of seeders and game balancers alike, a victory by character less than a fortnight old, a send-off worthy of a series veteran, and finally, the emergence of a prodigious figure to usher in the dawn of a new age of Ultimate. What more could the series realistically have left to show us? Surely it was running out of new tricks to pull, but then, honestly, what were the odds that we'd seen any of these anomalies happen twice? Kagaribi 8 was a strange event, running afoul of COVID just one more time. Several high-profile DQs, like Akola, T, and Kome, left the tournament in sort of a lurch. It was a major, but nearly 300 entrants smaller than the previous installment, just 3 months later. And of course, there's the matter of its results, where a Kagaribi regular got second using an off-meta character, and being defeated in Grands by an out-of-nowhere young Wi-Fi prodigy who'd go on to redefine the character and the global meta as a whole. Again.
それができている。現地のターンですよ。88%一気につないでいって、これは見せていなかった選択肢ですね。ここまで来たらもうリスクも俺が熊井運びでクした熊井。激戦。帰らせて。上スマッシュ。激戦。そこで上島ですか。ですね。これはショートループでガッチリキャッチ。 紫2匹が立ち上がるの。このアテナが届かない。外に飛んでるぞ。回避見て、空中前、ジャンプがない状況。ジャンプが残っていた。ジャンプ残っている。空前狙ってますよ。空前超えた。横強。ジャンプに横強。2つ目の超新星。
On initial glance, it's hard to think of Mia as separate from Akola. They have such similar stories, they rose to prominence within months of each other, and their rivalry and competition would come to be a core aspect of Japanese Smash over the following years. But for one, Mia was 2 years older than Akola, and for another, he'd go on to have a very different career. Volatile, while Akola was a pillar of consistency, something that would cost him a top 10 placement at the end of the year, and then, gradually, more and more threatening in periods where Akola's dominance waned, ultimately leading Mia to outplace him for the first time in the second half of 2024, and later claim the record for most major tournaments won in Smash Ultimate over just about a 3-year career. Despite approaching double-digit totals of Mia-Akola Grands, their dynamic has remained competitive and elastic through to the current day. There are Smash fans out there who really dislike watching Mia, and vehemently resent what his and Akola's reigns have come to represent. Me, I think Mia might be one of my favorite players ever. More on that another time. Congratulations to new Kagaribi Major Top 8ers, Mia, Abadango, Umeki, and Futari no Kuwami A. Ironically, while Mia was another out-of-nowhere surprise, most of Kagaribi 8's results were the culmination of now years of dedication. Umeki had been to 5 of the prior 7 Kagaribis, and both Fudakiwa and Abadongo had been to 6. Among these troopers, it was Abadongo who wound up pulling away, defeating Protobanum, Shuton, Ken, and more in his best post-quarantine event to date, and doing so with Meta Knight in the character's best SSBU major performance ever. And in the grand scheme of things, it's fitting that so many veterans of the scene were finally able to pass that penultimate threshold and compete on the top 8 stage. Soon, there would be one more veteran on his way back, and he'd need as warm a welcome as he could get. June 19th, 2022. The Japanese Pokemon Unite Regional Championships. The top 2 finishers advanced to the World Championship stage. After making it through round-robin pools the day before, Zachary's team, Gingadon, sits waiting in the final bracket. Waiting, and waiting, and waiting. One of their members, who worked a night shift at their day job just hours before, is missing. Oversleeping, it would later be revealed. In order to prevent losing competitors from swapping teams, the rules at the time prohibit any substitutions. Down one player, Gingadon is forced to forfeit out of the tournament and immediately disbands. On Zachary's stream immediately after, he appears to be in relatively high spirits, describing the event as a load off his shoulder and even laughing about it at points. The team had reportedly separated on good terms and he was motivated to return to Smash. I don't think it's appropriate to speculate too deeply on the lasting impact of these events, especially when Zachary's already made this sort of public statement, but I will say, for a game he'd enjoyed and played at a high level, I think it's telling that Zachary has never returned to Pokemon Unite, even just on his YouTube channel. With bittersweet joy, but joy nonetheless, Smash fans saw Zachary return to competition in August, where the fan favorite would win French Major Ultimate Wanted 4. While obviously an impressive accomplishment, those hoping for a full return to form had their hopes slightly dampened in October, where Zachary would underperform back-to-back at Maisuma Top 10 and the Ludwig Smash Invitational. So, going into Kagaribi 9, the first Kagaribi of 2023, spectators really weren't sure what to expect. Despite what his Kagaribi results might indicate, Zachary had always been relatively inconsistent as far as top players go, capable of both winning any event he entered, but also occasionally missing top 32. With his relatively sparse attendance since his return, and this being the largest Kagaribi yet, the first to ever break 1,000 entrants, it was anyone's guess which Zachary would get in his first return to the series. But it looked like we might have an answer, after Zachary fell 1-3 to Minmin player Rimu in Winners Top 128. In all likelihood, Zachary would peter out in losers, and fall short, perhaps several rounds short, of his 7th seed. It was just the most reasonable conclusion. But the world we live in is not one of likelihoods. Instead, we live in a world where Zachary does this.
Oh my god! さあやり返せるかどうか。ジャストシールの下強空回転不利だと下側に引っかかってしまうということで。そうですね。下強がかなり上判定が。ダウン空中から横強まで。空ここは触れてないから上に落として
Zachary had a new main, one that had never made a solo major top 8 before, but 4 years into the game's lifespan, Zachary took it upon himself to personally spearhead the character, and, incredibly, it has endured as his main through the present day, taking victories over the likes of Umeki, Neo, Riziasu, Kameme, Aim, Ken, and Yoshidora. Zachary's Kagaribi 9 losers run has become one of the defining events of his career, a triumphant return to his signature event series that marked the beginning of a new era for the player. Zachary's run would only be stopped short by a reverse 3-0 from Ashimo, who'd go on to rematch Akola in Grand Finals in Kagaribi's second ever repeated final matchup. Akola would walk away the victor, making him the second player to ever win multiple Kagaribis, but not before dropping the first set of grants to the greatest Ryu player in the world. This set, for the next year and change, would be the only ground Ashimo had ever gained against Akola, who'd held him at the gate now twice in the Super Major Grand Finals. But, appropriately, When Ashimo did finally get his first Super Major victory at Sumobata SP55, it was with a Game 5 comeback victory over the future world number 1. And of course, congratulations are in order for new Kagaribi top 8ers, Now and AIM. I'd like to highlight AIM specifically. The Shikamain hadn't missed a Kagaribi since the event's inception back in 2020, and at Kagaribis 3, 7, and 8, he'd finish at 9th place, falling just shy of the coveted top 8. I imagine it must have been so cathartic for him to finally break through to the top cut. And though he couldn't know it at the time, Kagaribi 9 may well have been AIM's last chance, because come Kagaribi 10 and Golden Week 2023, it was finally time for the series to go international. As mentioned all the way back in the introduction, for most of competitive Smash's lifetime, the global scene had been centered around events and players in North America. Japanese players saw great success throughout this time, of course, but primarily by going overseas and performing well at Western events. And a narrative existed that in order for international players to be considered good, they had to prove it by traveling to America. Part of this had to do with the rankings. In an article explaining how Japan was perpetually underranked, Luminary co-founder Stuart98 makes several poignant observations about how many global rankings from Brawl through early Ultimate systematically undervalued Japanese events and players, often due to the assumption that overseas events needed international attendance to be appropriately competitive. And though Japan received more and more representation as global rankings improved over time, prevailing Western attitudes still regarded it as the weaker region. When Hidden Boss Ron made the PGRU Fall 2019 Top 50, alongside a record 20 total Japanese players, several NA competitors felt so alienated by the perceived Japanese bias that they formed their own competing panel ranking, the Global Smash Power Ranking, which, somewhat predictably, wound up greatly favoring American players. By 2023, though, that attitude was changing, and changing fast, in part due to the precipitous rise of Akola, Mia, and others, in part due to standout victories from Japanese players at NA tournaments like Bad Luck BC4 and Double Down 2022, Japan was more and more being considered as a contender for the strongest super region in the world. Now the narrative was shifting. In 2019, while several dozen Japanese players made the trek to the States to compete in Western tournaments, the number of NA players who traveled to Japanese events was just about 4. MKLeo, Cosmos, Void, and Nakat. Now, perhaps because the pandemic had finally largely stopped getting in the way of international travel, and perhaps because of the influx of great Japanese performances, Golden Week 2023 saw a huge contingent of North Americans set to invade the country, including Fatality, Void, Send, Jazo, Cosmos, Lima, Dabuz, Zomba, Riddles, and the number 1 player on the continent, Sparko. Japan braced for impact. Following this event, there would be debate over whether NA had performed well at Kagaribi or not. Overall, I think it's fair to say they came away looking pretty good. Outside of some rough losses from Cosmos and Mutes, everything NA accomplished here is pretty respectable. Riddles took an upset to Dio Snake, but beat Kome, Shuton, Lima, Omuatsu, and Masha in a 5-set run to 7th place. Congratulations to first-time Kagaribi top 8 Riddles. Dabuz somewhat confusingly lost a set to Sonic player Taike, but he too persevered, winning 9 sets over Kanaji, Matsunabe, Abadango, Hikaru, Dio, Hurt, Passeriman, Riddles, and Hero to place 4th. Congratulations to first-time Kagaribi top 8 Dabuz. 6 Game 5 sets in there, by the way. And most notably, after being defeated by Samus Main Yaura, Spargo would rally to put on an incredible 11-set losers run, beating Yamanaction, Yoshi, Ike, Ashimo, Ken, Mia, Yoshidora, Dabuz, Zachary, and tearing through Akola's gauntlet of Fighter Pass 2 top tiers to win Kagaribi 10, becoming the first and only non-Japanese player to win a premier Ultimate event in the country. By now, this probably sounds familiar, but Spargo's Kagaribi 10 went down as a landmark run for him, arguably one of the greatest event wins of his career. It set his reputation as kryptonite against Japanese players. It kept his season in hot contention with Akola's immaculate showings for number 1 in the world, and set the stage for the dominance he'd show in their head-to-heads in the years that followed. Kagaribi 10, for my money, has gone down as one of the most important events in Smash Ultimate's lifetime. And it has one more important storyline hidden away, a surprise run that would only become truly notable later. At Kagaribi 7, emerging from the southern wilds of Kyushu and its KOWLOON tournament series came Hurt, a Snake player who entered the bracket as the 353rd seed and came away at 97th place. At Kagaribi 8, now seeded 133rd, Hurt would once again beat his seed to place 65th. But now, at Kagaribi 10, once again seeded 133, anyone watching would be fair to assume that things would play out this time as predicted. Hurt lost in pools to Ikeman Yez, and faced a precipitous climb just to get into the top 128. But Hurt won his 2 sets in pools, and then, as if losing to Yez had finally caused something to click inside his head, Hurt proceeded to tear through the losers bracket, defeating Sasusoro, Boy George, LY, Fudakiwa, Yoga Sharp, Takara, and Taikei before his run was just barely halted at 13th place by the Buzz. Hurt would not come away from Kagaribi 10 with a top 8 finish, but he would come away a changed player, set irrevocably on a path that would lead him to global conquest. Congratulations to first-time Kagaribi top 8ers Katanabe and Hurt. Hurt entered Kagaribi 11 as the 9th seed, bolstered by a standout performance at Super Major Delta 5 just the month prior. But like Zachary 7 Kagaribis prior, Japanese seeding struck once again. Diddy Kong main Etsuji, one of the strongest players in the country both pre- and immediately post-quarantine, had been on hiatus from Smash tournaments for about a year when he decided to register for Kagaribi 11. As a result, he entered the tournament as seed 329. Etsuji would, of course, blow this expectation out of the water, defeating the likes of Shisho, Sigma, Doramiki, and, yes, Hurt, en route to a 17th place finish. That left Hurt sitting in losers top 96, with at least 7 rounds of competition to go before he could even reach the top 8. For many players, it would be an unprecedented, impossible position, but thankfully for Hurt, he'd been there before. Rallying in the losers bracket, Hurt defeated Ball, Kuro, Ryuo, Level 1, Flo, Yaura, and Shutone all in a row to secure a well-earned first ever Kagaribi top 8. Funnily enough, after Etsuji's loss to Zachary and Winners, the Diddy Kong player was just 1 set away from rematching Hurt in the losers bracket. In a way, Yaura may have ended up saving Hurt's run. Still, after bowing out to Zachary at 7th place, Hurt's explosive drive to top 8 seemed like it would be the highlight of the event. Then, Zachary sat down to play T. By this point, both T and Zachary were old hats at this. A Kagaribi top 8 may as well be home turf. They were in their elements, just ready to have a good time, and they both showed it, mugging for the camera in the lead up to the set. T in particular has always been an expressive player, a little goofy, always eager to put on a show. In Game 1, his Kazuya 3-stocks an unprepared Zachary Joker, and T mimics the Terror from Tekken's win pose to raucous audience applause. In Game 2, though, Zachary strikes back, switching to his tried and true Rob and bulldozing T, ending the game with a gyro to death confirm at just 38%. At first, he smiles and laughs, with the camera briefly cutting to show T's bemused response. Then, Zachary mimics T's pose, arms crossed and eyes staring wide into the camera. This is the point of no return. These players are on stage emoting at each other. We have entered the Smash equivalent of professional wrestling. This is not a set. This is content, and both players are ready to entertain. What follows is a wildly back-and-forth series of games. T takes the lead by punishing Zachary's get-up attack Game 3. Zachary answers with a 0-to-death combo to take Game 4, turns to the camera, and repeats the pose. Game 5 goes down to the wire, with each player having an opportunity to potentially take the victory until T catches Zachary's unsafe ledge option one time more. He rubs his hands together like a fucking supervillain, pats Zachary on the shoulder, wraps up his controller, then descends to the crowd to cross his arms one more time. Appropriately, the VOD of this match would go on to be the most viewed of any from the event, and among the most watched tournament VODs of the year. Oh yeah, also, Mio won his second Kagaribi! Now the third ever player to win multiple Kagaribi titles, Mio would storm his way through the bracket, not losing a single game until his winner's final set against Akola. Here, at last, Mio was finally able to clutch out a Game 5 versus the #1 player in Smash, winning the tournament and marking the beginning of a new stage of their rivalry, one in which the Game & Watch player had a fighting chance. Mio would go on to win exactly 5 of their next 10 sets, and by the end of the year, he'd be named one of the 4 horsemen of the new Ultimate meta, finally, unambiguously establishing himself as one of the best players that Alt has ever and will ever see. I want to back off for a second here and go from talking about the players to talking about the tournament. Though Kagaribi had gained a lot of attention and acclaim during the Code era by virtue of being the largest major series that ran during this time, its ascension to the position of Golden Week capstone in 2022 had rocketed it to success over the past 2 years. Kagaribi 11 was the third in a row to host more than 1,000 entrants, and at the upcoming Golden Week Kagaribi 12, that number would breach 2,000. But aside from the benefits of timing, there are specific aspects of its organization that the Kagaribi team implemented which kept players and spectators alike coming back again and again. The production is consistently slick and professional, with wonderful trailers and celebratory videos, all while the team, in BOBC-TO Deer's words, does a lot with very little. On the monetary side, Kagaribi is obviously being managed very well, with financial disclosures from the past few years showing that the tournament often operates in the black, with money of course going directly into the next year's budget. There are also structures in place to help bridge the gap between player, TO, and audience member. For example, the cheerboards, where Twitter users can submit fan art or messages of support for their favorite players to then be shown on the tournament stream. Kagaribi also typically follows the Japanese tradition of pairing commentators with top players at casting desks, featuring at times the likes of Abadango, Passeriman, Kyon, and even Zachary. According to Sean from Somewhere, players who are the first seed of their pools even assume the role of pool captains, taking on TO duties to organize tournament matches within their section of the bracket, and tracking the outcomes on paper. And that community building effort pays off. Here, at the end of Kagaribi 12, when the event concludes, the entire venue pulls together to fold up chairs, take down setups, and leave the space clean at the end of the day. It's not a perfect event. I've got my seating complaints, of course, and with each iteration, more and more attendees bring up the issue of overcrowding in the venue. But it is, by all accounts I've read, a very well managed and competently run event. And sometimes, that's all you need. Kagaribi 12, May 5th to 6th, Golden Week 2024. After dropping last year's event to Spargo, Japan looks to turn things around this year and rally in defense of their country. They'll need all the help they can get, because this year, the invading armada is even bigger. Spargo and Zomba return, alongside Base Mage, Jazo, Goblin, Big D, MK Big Boss, Meister, and returning to Japan for the first time since 2019, MK Leo. Adding in Gluttony, the best player from Europe, and it becomes clear that the West has shown up in force. Invaders make up 3 of the event's top 8 seeds and 6 of the top 32. Japan braces for impact. And this time, they hold. Within the past year, a revolution has been taking place. Throughout Japan, more and more players are coming into their own as global threats. Many of these players hail from Kansai and the Maisuma and Sumabato events that helped propel Mia and Akola to greatness. But in truth, the up-and-comers are pouring in from across Japan, and here at Kagaribi 12, the full might of Japan's scene is unleashed upon the invaders. Big D finds himself unfortunately double eliminated by Depth Duck Hunt Ubuge in pools. Big Boss and Base Mage both put up good performances but fall as seeded at 33rd to Akola level 1 and Mia Yamanaction respectively. Spargo, facing down Toriguri in the rare Cloud vs Banjo matchup, is unexpectedly upset by the character specialist, and summarily also drops out of the event at 33rd after a harsh defeat by Pokemon trainer Noi. Zomba falls early and wins to Lax, the Crom main with one of the best records in the world against Rob, and is defeated by Shuton for 25th. Leo finds himself defeated at the hands of Snow in the Mario matchup that's plagued him throughout his career, and is knocked out of the bracket at 25th by Yamanaction's Steve. Jazo and Goblin both manage to outplace their seeds, but still can't breach the top 24, falling to a combination of Raru, Kandanabe, Mia, and Chicken. Meister makes a valiant showing, but with plenty of experience fighting Mia, Tamapi, Daifuka, and Dormike are able to triumph over him despite the unfavorable matchups. Lastly, at 9th place, Gluttony is eliminated by a combination of Ashimo and Ken in 2 of Wario's worst matchups. And with that, the defense is perfect. 10 high-profile Western invaders enter Kagaribi 12. 0 make it to top 8. If there is a singular, unmistakable moment where Japan becomes the consensus best region in the world, this is it. The pendulum, which had begun to swing all the way back in fall 2019, passes the equilibrium position here and keeps going. NA sent some of their best to Japan and they couldn't do it. Nothing for it but admitting defeat, rolling down the window for the flight back, and getting ready to try again next year. So let's finally talk about that top 8, huh? Congratulations to new Kagaribi top 8er Tamapi Daifuku. Coming out of nowhere at Delta 7 a few months prior, the young Bayo's 5th place finish at this event would be the final push he needed to mount a surprise top 10 ranking in the first half of the year. Tamapi would bow out of the event at 5th, losing to Zachary. Hi there again, Zachary, who in turn would fall at 4th to Akola. Akola would then finish Kagaribi 12 at 3rd place, being double eliminated by, there he is, Hurt. who, in contrast to his last two Kagaribis, had this time decided on a winner's bracket run, defeating T, Zachary, and double eliminating Akola to place second. And finally, the event's champion, vaulting over Zachary and Akola to claim the most ever Kagaribi titles, was the returning defender, Fennel Gaming's own Mia. And with that, we've reached the present. To this date, number 12 is the last numbered installment in the series, making it the most recent Kagaribi. Unless, that is, you're alright with stretching the definition. The Kagaribi team, remember, began as a collaborative effort between EGS and BGBC, and a wide network of Japanese TOs, one which has only grown over its now 5-year history. So if, hypothetically, another team of organizers were to collaborate with their own huge event, surely that should also count, right? I mean, it's in the name. KOWLOON, the main tournament series in Japan's southern landmass of Kyushu, is sort of the Lancer counterpart to Kagaribi's main protagonist Energy. KOWLOON events are sort of scrappy, wildly oscillating from national or major level tournaments to smaller Kyushu regionals. The audience is known to be among the loudest Japan has to offer, the most comparable to crowds at Western events, and the commentary can sound like this. But like many tournaments in Japan as of late, the KOWLOON team has only grown larger and more ambitious. At the start of 2024, they launched KOWLOON 9 with Sumabato, a premier event put on collaboratively by TOs from both groups, held in Kansai at the Sumabato venue, and the tournament was a big success. Now, on July 27th and 28th, they would repeat the feat in Tokyo, at KOWLOON 12 with Kagaribi. So, if you're generous enough to count it, congratulations to new Kagaribi top 8ers Level 1, Doramiki, and Ryo. Ryo especially had been looking for this result for a while. Ever since the original Kagaribi, Ryo had attended the tournaments again and again, only ever missing Kagaribi 8. His 7th place finish here came on the back of an incredible losers run, with 5 straight wins over Ken, Raru, Toriguri Snow, and Akihiksu. Ryo would be eliminated by Zachary. Hi again, Zachary, who in turn would fall to level 1 at 5th, granting a top 4 finish to another player who'd been feeding for it, with the Toon Link main having attended 7 of the previous Kagaribis. Level 1 in turn would fall to Spargo, who'd been bested by Doramigi earlier in bracket, but who won the runback in losers and was now looking to take revenge for his underperformance at Kagaribi 12. Now, in losers finals, the only player standing between him and Grands was his continued rival for number 1 in the world, Akola. This set deserves its own video. It'll get its own video, unless something awful happens to me between now and the end of Ultimate's lifespan, but for those of you who don't want to wait that indeterminable length of time, let me just hit the highlights. From 2023 on, Spargo was Akola's biggest bracket demon, the one player that he just couldn't manage to beat. Shortly after Kagaribi 10, he opted to give up on trying Steve against Spargo altogether, and instead worked on an Aegis secondary carefully honed to defeat his opponent's Cloud. To Spargo, meanwhile, Akola might have been the demon of his career. Again and again, Spargo turned in fantastic seasons, near perfect performances except for just 1 or 2 slip-ups, which in any other game would make him a shoo-in for the global number 1. Except that he was competing in the same era as Akola, whose records weren't near perfect, they were essentially immaculate. Spargo was the player Akola just couldn't beat, and Akola was the player Spargo just couldn't consistently outperform. It all came together here, in a Game 4 set, with all the work on his Aegis finally paying off. Akola would defeat Spargo for the first time in 2 years, defending Japan once more to thunderous applause. I want to save a deeper analysis of this set, both the lead-up and the aftermath, for another time, but one thing I want to highlight is this. After the set, on broadcast, the commentators are crying. Akola showed the world how much this meant to him, and watching his journey reach this conclusion, Oam Naoto and Soon respond as any invested person would, emphatically empathetic. Akola rode the momentum of his Spargo victory to win the first set of Grands against Mia, but would fall short in Game 5 of Set 2, leaving Mia, by my count at least, the first and only 4-time Kagaribi champion. This is a fact I think doesn't get brought up enough. In Japan's most prestigious new tournament series, the player to have won more events than any other, and indeed the one to take home the gold at the last 3 iterations in a row, isn't Akola, the poster child for Japan's rise to dominance. It's Mia, perpetually second place, second best, the second to ascend to prominence, at least until the second half of 2024, where, at the end of the year, Mia would finally outplace Akola on the global rankings. Still second place in the world, but finally gaining a complete victory over his greatest rival. So there you have it, Kagaribi, Japan's fiercest tournament series. From the moment that some of Tokyo's most experienced TOs assembled to host it, This event seemed destined for greatness, and time and again it delivered, marking watershed moments in the development of the competitive Smash scene again and again. It is, without a doubt, the most prestigious Japanese tournament you can win in the modern day. But as a series, does it hold up to something like Big House, Genesis, or EVO? I think it's arguable. Japan remains the best super region, and Kagaribi remains the biggest event it has to offer, but these things take time. It's so relatively new that we're still seeing just how its legacy is developing, and furthermore, so many of its iterations were kind of closed off from the rest of the world due to the pandemic or just geography, that it's somewhat of a stretch to argue its overall impact on the global scene meets the requisite magnitude. With the right argument, put the right way, I'd be willing to call Kagaribi the most important series in Smash Ultimate's history. But the argument's not quite fireproof. Not yet. If you're watching this video in the days immediately after it goes up, then you knew this was coming. Kagaribi 13 will, by all accounts, be the biggest event in Smash Ultimate's 6-year history, and anything that occurs after is unlikely to come even close. The Lumirank TTS, which measures the size and competitiveness of Smash tournaments, often operates on the scale of 100 points to about 9 or 10,000. Kagaribi 13 is a 22,000 point event, and seems likely to feature at least 40 of the last global top 50, all of the major active talent in Japan, and the majority of top-level competition from across the world. It's quite simply a once-in-a-decade event, one which will inevitably define how the game will continue to change going forwards. And it's this weekend. It's in Japan during Golden Week. It's this series. How might the event unfold? Well, who's to say? It bears mention that as Kagaribis have gotten larger, their surprise rating have generally shrunk, with the most recent iterations putting up numbers from 14 to 19, a far cry from the 30 to 40 point chaos that unfolded earlier in its lifetime. But with a tournament this large, it's not hard to believe that we'll pass some event horizon of concentrated talent and all hell will break loose, as was the case at the most comparable event, Smash 4's 2GG Civil War. Historically speaking, Mia has won the last 3 Kagaribis in a row, so he seems likely enough to at least do really well. Of course, you can't count out Akola, Spargo, or Sonics, the latter of whom will be traveling to a Japanese event for the first time, alongside the likes of Tweak, Light, Syrup, and way more players than I can name. But although it might be a long shot, I'd bet on Zachary making top 8 at the event. After all, across the event's dozen or so iterations, time and again, Zachary is the only player besides Akola to attend multiple Kagaribis, and top 8 every single one. A bonfire is a large and controlled outdoor fire, traditionally serving purposes like waste disposal, marking part of a religious feast, or just being an occasion for a community to come together. I think Kagaribi has more than lived up to its name. In 2020, it was like a light at the end of a tunnel, a source of warmth and normalcy for a population both local and global that craved a return to the status quo, a way to toss out all the anxiety and refuse that had built up over the pandemic. And going forwards, it's become a community beacon in its own right, growing with each year as more and more people come together and contribute, whether helping to run it, competing in it, or simply being there to watch the show. Every single person who has ever and will ever enter one of these events can smile, knowing they've contributed to building this hot, roaring bonfire, whether they're Japanese or Western, player or TO, grand finalist or O-Tour. It is something beautiful, and something that's the Smash community's exclusively to claim. The most important tournament series in the game. And it's only just heating up. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking the video and subscribing to this channel for more content like it. Eventually. You could probably hear my voice sort of going over the course of that recording. And thanks to RisterMice for recording a segment for this on such short notice. It was hugely appreciated. My name is SDG, and I'll see you later.